It has officially been over a month since I first saw Superman 2025 under the creative direction and vision of James Gunn. And let me just say that this movie is so good and there's so many different things to talk about with it. The performances, the world building, and plot points all just come together and create exactly what I was looking for. Everything just sort of hits the right spots in the back of my brain. And David Cornsett's take on the character is hopeful, charismatic, and charming. He's kind of corny, but he doesn't play it out to an extent to where it gets annoying. It's done very, very well. But something that I think this movie really succeeds in, and what it does way better than any other Superman film has ever done, is show that Superman, the Man of Steel, arguably the most powerful person in the DCU from now until however long, most of all, is human. And what that really means is he's extremely empathetic and kind, and that's not what makes the character boring. And that's what makes him the most compelling. And this is something me and a lot of diehard comic book fans have been screaming for years. Despite that, however, it's no secret that the discourse around this film up until the build-up, even up until now, has been mixed. And a lot of that, who has a better portrayal of the character, Henry Cavill or David Cornsweet, or who's the better director, Zack Snyder or James Gunn. Some people feel like David Cornsweet's version of the character is kind of silly and too goofy to be the Man of Steel, whereas others feel like Zack Snyder's version of the character was extremely depressing and hard to watch at times. And to be completely honest, though I love to play devil's advocate and pick a side, I gotta be real, I don't agree with either of those takes, because I have a secret. Here, come here. This is Superman. And this is also Superman.
You okay?
And so is he. And so is he. And so is he. And him, and him, and him, and him, and him. The problem has nothing to do with the actual portrayals of the character. The problem is movies and TV shows create the most recognizable and iconic versions of the characters for casual audiences. And however they're depicted on a screen is how the general public is gonna know or recognize the character for a while. Popular examples would be somebody like Adam West's Batman or Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. Now, you wouldn't tell somebody that these aren't valid versions of the characters. 100% valid versions of the characters. What you would argue though is that neither of these are really comic book accurate, and probably at the time of their release there were people complaining about how different they were. When it comes to Adam West's Batman at that point was already very dark, serious, and gritty and dealing with serious issues. Adam West was very silly and goofy, and though today the show is held in high regard, at the time a lot of people who read comic books or were a fan of Batman had issues. Spider-Man, Peter Parker had been using web shooters for 40 years, and because of that, there's a whole generation of people, me included, who thought that Spider-Man naturally came with the gross wrist web sack thing. Now, that doesn't make them bad versions of the character. In fact, I still love both versions of these characters, and a lot of people do, but it does mean that they're different versions of the character. I think that's part of the reason I get upset whenever we have versus battles between which version of the character is better, because at the end of the day, writers are going to have their own take and want to do their own things with the characters, and I sort of appreciate the originality. But my main point is, for as long as adaptation has existed, there's always been changes. I'm pretty sure big fans of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein had an issue of making Frankenstein look like this when he's described like this. Adaptation may not always line up with its source material, but that doesn't mean it's not a legitimate version of the character. And this is especially true when we're talking about something as ridiculous as comics. Continuity errors have been ingrained in the genre for, again, as long as they've been printed. So when you ask me what's a lore accurate Superman, I'd argue with you things that Zack Snyder or James Gunn get right or wrong about the character, but at the end of the day, people are just making stuff up anyway. To be completely honest, comic book continuity is just as convoluted as the current continuity is for the cinematic DCU. The main difference is just the extreme gap in budget between the two, but at the end of the day, they're doing the exact same thing. Rewriting each other, new authors and writers taking over, directors having different takes, and ultimately getting completely different versions of the character. Comic books in the continuity, believe it or not, are just as ridiculous as the DCEU presented itself. Arguably, I'd say the way it was ran was the most comic book accurate thing that I've ever gotten. The main difference between the two is just the extreme gap in budget and time between which projects are released. But what's always been able to save the genre from itself is its ability to have multiple interpretations of a character at once. Right now, I know that the mainline Batman isn't this guy, but I've been really enjoying this run of Absolute Batman. Again, that doesn't mean that this version of Batman is any less legit than this version of Batman. This conversation of canon has never really applied because it always changes depending on the writer, time, and who's producing it. The idea of the multiverse, the timelines, it doesn't mean that any one version of Batman is more Batman than Batman. It means that they're all Batman. That being said, I don't necessarily think Zack Snyder's version of Superman was a bad Superman, just a different Superman. Focusing on aspects and ideas of the character that casual fans frankly weren't ready for when the movie came out. Now, I understand during the production of it all, they wanted to create a more grounded and realistic take of the character. However, Cavill was framed as a god among men, and his attitude is written to be slightly jaded towards the rest of humanity. These are not new ideas for Superman. These are ideas that other writers have done in the past, which Zack Snyder took inspiration from. But they are ideas that only really work when you know what the standard of Superman is supposed to be, which is generally what Hornswett's version of the character is. A more hopeful, endearing member of society who's trying to do the best for humanity. All I'm saying is Snyder's version of the character, or Cavill's portrayal, doesn't work as well when you don't have that point of reference for what Superman is supposed to do. I think the expectation for the film when people were familiar enough with the character already, and the introspective aspects of the film were something the audience themselves were supposed to ponder. How would the world react to somebody as powerful and as domineering as Superman? So while me and other fans of the character appreciate the nuance in the character, it's hard to have nuance when people don't know what the base is. It's essentially a what-if story. Cavill is framed as a god among men, someone who's slightly jaded to the idea of helping humanity in the first place. While these sorts of ideas definitely do apply to the character of Superman, they don't serve well as a good base for the character, and certainly not a good point of reference for how Superman is supposed to act. And at the point in which the movie came out, only really comic book fans would have recognized it. I definitely see how intentional Zack Snyder and Cavill were in crafting this version of the character, but it's just something that people weren't expecting or ready to see. Think about it. There's a whole generation of kids that grew up with this being their first impression of Superman. And he says things like,
"You won't let me live. You won't let me die. The world needs you. It doesn't need you. Tell me.
And that same generation grew up with foils of the character, like Omni-Man and Homelander. And we've gotten to the point where these alternative takes on the Man of Steel are more prevalent than the actual baseline versions of the character. Again, Cavill's version of Superman is still a valid version of Superman. He just doesn't serve as a good base, because what he is a what-if story for people who are more familiar with the character. And it's no wonder that at this point, the idea of Superman being a little bit goofy or somewhat lighthearted can be jarring for a lot of people. Comic book continuity has always been sketchy at best, and alternate versions of the characters have always existed. An alternative version of Superman that I really like is Injustice Superman. This is a version of the character whose love for Lois Lane superseded everything, even humanity's freedom. And to be honest, for those who actually remember the Snyderverse and what they were building towards, this was kind of the version of the character that we were getting, especially in the Snyderverse. Again, the issue being Injustice Superman shouldn't be your introduction to the character. What makes Injustice Superman so compelling is the things that he does are meant to be shocking to the audience. Superman isn't a fascist dictator. He wouldn't use his powers to control people. He wouldn't kill anyone. You see my point. Look, there are a lot of reasons why some fans may prefer this version of the character and why others may prefer this version of the character. But it'd be wrong not to acknowledge where the other side might be coming from. This whole comic book accuracy conversation at this point is kind of ridiculous, because at the end of the day, you just gotta let a director direct. Different writers are gonna have different interpretations, and different directors are gonna want to show different aspects of the character. Sometimes they can create new versions or introduce new aspects of a character that previously didn't exist, that work perfectly fine in the mythos and are handled correctly. Ultimately, there really is no such thing as a bad idea, just poor execution. And when it comes to execution, James Gunn has shown time and time again that he's really good at it. Ultimately, this movie, Superman 2025, is utterly amazing. I love the colors and the action, and I felt like all the characters were real people and lived in this already established world. This is what it feels like to hop into a comic book, even if you haven't read issue number 1. It's already established. You don't need to know everything, but you're good to go. At first, it can definitely feel rushed, but once you get adjusted to the pace, it's nothing new. Corin Sweat, like I said, is the right amount of optimistic for the character, and he portrays him really, really well. Mr. Terrific almost stole the entire show. I love Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor. It's probably one of my favorite villain performances ever, top 3 at least. And it's a really good movie. If you've seen the Chris Reeve movies from back in the day, you can definitely see where and how James Gunn plays homage to those movies. Lex's plan and also his assistant or his girlfriend bring different aspects like that back to the character, things that were lost to time. I think that's really, really cool. Lois is great, Jimmy is great. The chemistry between all the actors and characters is through the roof. It's a good movie. Like, trust me, it's a good movie. So what now? We know DC's continuity is confusing, and we have versions of every single character that most people care about. Where do they go? What happened? You know, everything feels like it's been left off this crazy cliffhanger. I wasn't the hugest fan of the Snyderverse, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious to see where the Nightmare was gonna go. And that's where I have my main idea, the entire reason I'm making this video. In the Snyder Cut version of the DCEU, it sort of ends off of Injustice-esque Henry Cavill Superman basically taking over the planet.
We can't be out in the open much longer. He'll come for us.
You need me to help you undo this world you created by letting her die.
Poor Lois. How she suffered so.
This is probably due to or because of the death of Lois Lane. Again, sharing similarities. Ben Affleck's Batman is more seasoned and different. We have the Joker, not our favorite version of Joker, but we have all these characters. It's mentioned that Wonder Woman is gone. So here's what I think they should do. Continue. Let James Gunn cook. You feel me? As everybody would say, let him do his thing. Let him come up with different storylines, characters, and build them up so we can get acquainted with a new baseline for the heroes that we all love. And then at some point, if you simply took the Gunn characters and had them transport into the Snyderverse and assist those heroes with handling that version of Superman, then we could finally have both versions of the character and they could face off. I see it as a win-win.
I knew they'd pull you over eventually. You don't belong here. My obligations don't end at the borders of my dimension. I am this world's savior. I protect it. That's what's happening out there? Protection? Disobedient children will be punished. Children? We're not gods. We don't decide who lives and who dies.
This decision is mine. It became mine when Joker turned me into a weapon of mass destruction.
I know what you lost.
And you judge me?
After I've killed you, I'll bring Lois here. When she sees how I've perfected this world, she'll be afraid and disgusted.
She'll be alive.
Lois's death doesn't
He stole her from me.
You stole this planet's freedom. It's time to give it back.
I don't know. Ultimately, what I'm trying to say is these are comic book movies. They're not meant to be taken too seriously, but there's a lot of potential there. And at the end of the day, as long as you're having a good time, as long as you're having fun, you can't be doing anything wrong. If you take anything with you after watching this video, keep in mind that all versions of these characters matter and that they're all valid. Each one of them is an equal version of the characters that you, me, and a bunch of other people have come to love.
Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that good stuff, and let me know what you think in the comments.